Welcome once more, ladies and gentlemen, to All Things Wellington. I'm Josh, and somewhere to my left or right is Marcus.
Hello!
Today, we talk about Wellington's masterpiece, the battle where he famously said he beat 40,000 men in 40 minutes. And that, of course, is the Battle of Salamanca in 1812. It was a bad year for the French, 1812, and here we're going to talk about Wellington's how Wellington won the Battle of Salamanca. Any starting thoughts here, Marcus?
Well, just in context of the entire Napoleonic Wars, Wellington says that his greatest victory is Assaye. The most written about battle is Waterloo, but for many of us, Salamanca stands out as being his greatest victory. Waterloo's more written about because he faces some general. But it's at Salamanca that we show that A, he's an offensive general, B, he can be opportunist, and he really goes on the attack like we almost never see to this scale before. And like you said, it's a really short scale battle, 45 minutes for the main attack, but it's really decisive. And in the scale of the Napoleonic War, at the same time, almost in sequence, Napoleon's making his great failure into Russia.
Indeed.
So it's a good time for the Allies, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting about what he termed his favourite battles, because I was reading a lot of stuff about Salamanca leading up to this, and he says separately once that the best thing he ever did by way of fighting was Assaye, but I think it was either Greville or Croker who asked him later in life about, were talking to him about his campaigns, and he actually said that his best battles were Salamanca, Vittoria, and Waterloo.
And so it's Salamanca and Vittoria, he's really on the offensive. Vittoria attacking in columns across multiple rivers. Salamanca, well, we'll come into, but he's marching in one direction and turns the whole thing on a sixpence and goes on the attack.
Right, so where do you think we should start with Salamanca?
Well, just a little bit of context. So, in the scale of 1812, Wellington and his army have managed to storm, famously, the two bastion cities of Badajoz and Ciudad Rodrigo over the winter. And on the 13th of June, Wellington and his large army were just under 50,000, around 48,000 men, including the Spanish contingent, march and occupy Salamanca. The next couple of weeks, General Marshal Marmont, who is commanding the French army, and Wellington's army, both very equal size, march in parallel out of Salamanca. They march at certain points really close, only a few kilometers apart. And by the last couple of days, they are marching almost eye to eye. They're getting incredibly close. And it's going to be down to almost like a game of chicken.
Quite so. Very dramatic stuff leading up to the Battle of Salamanca, let alone the actual battle itself. And it's a really great campaign to study if you're looking at maneuver. You can see the opposing generals thinking about how they can outfox each other, because like you were saying, they're not dealing with hundreds of thousands of men here. Marmont has got 48,000 men. Wellington's got roughly similar. He might have a bit more, actually. But the armies are not superior enough in numbers that they want to risk themselves. Marmont's being crafty. Wellington's being crafty. The situation, like you were saying, is pretty bad in Spain for the French, actually. They're stretched really thin. They haven't been able to stop Wellington coming through out of Portugal because Suchet is bogged down in the south. Marmont, he's dependent on reinforcements, I believe, from Joseph and Jourdan at Madrid. I think he's trying to herd Wellington back to Portugal, because the way they maneuver is that Wellington's moving towards Madrid and Salamanca and then to Madrid, because he has to take a bunch of forts at Salamanca and it takes a while to get through them. And Marmont, what he does is he's constantly trying to find a flank. He's constantly trying to move around Wellington to threaten his supplies. And Wellington is always managing to, he sees him turn, and so a triangle will appear. Marmont curves like that, and Wellington will say, well, there's a road that goes that way, so I'll move that way. So I keep So I keep in front of him. And this continues to happen. It continues to happen all the way down to July the 22nd, where it happens for the last time. And it's a fatal time.
Actually, on the night before the main battle, they're all crossing rivers across Spain, very wide torrents and difficult terrain. But there's a storm. And it's a nice little anecdote that, unfortunately, Mother Nature causes some of the first casualties, where several dragoons of the 5th Dragoon Guards are actually hit by lightning. Sets a furious terrain of rain and storms. You think these wide Spanish plains with steep hills and rocky crags to set the scene for the 22nd of July, 1812. That whole morning, they're on the marching parallel, really quite close to each other on the 22nd. And they march all morning. In fact, it goes past midday sun. There's some reports of how hot it is. The sun's on people's backs.
July in Spain, central Spain.
Yes, it's rained the night before, so I can imagine actually humidity is really high. Sun's beating down. There's no clouds, and everyone's in their woolen uniforms. And this is all about opportunity of marching his divisions or his corps.
Exactly. Salamanca is a battle of opportunity, and up to this point, both sides have been looking for that opportunity.
And it comes.
They come to this bit, this piece of ground, which is south of Salamanca, and just around a couple of towns like Arapiles and Aldea de Tejada. They originally form up facing each other, roughly with their flanks on two buttes, as Charles Esdale calls them, called the Arapiles.
Marmont himself, we were just reading, calls them land tables, if it helps. Flat top hills with very steep sides, with very flat tops.
And they're prominent because the rest of the land around is kind of flat and rolling with ridges, and these are very jutting structures. And Wellington gets the Arapile Chico, and Marmont takes the Arapile Grande, and they start to form their positions sort of based on these, with them at the end, at that or the end of their positions. However, Marmont, who has managed to seize the Arapile Grande, sees an opportunity here, and Wellington is very nervous. He's really wound up. He's really tight. He's all of his staff are talking about the fact that he's very anxious, always watching the French for an opportunity to do something, always watching them to see if they've got the drop on him. And it's at this point, nobody's quite sure if a battle's going to happen. They all know that everybody's looking for a battle. There's been skirmishing going on, and actually they're shooting cannons at each other.
Yeah, they're skirmishing over the two Arapiles. The skirmishing takes place for the French to try to drive the British off the smaller Arapiles hill. In fact, actually, for the French to take the greater Arapiles, there's some Portuguese skirmishers on top. So there has been fighting already in the morning, but it is to a skirmishing scale. It would have been taking place quite a lot over the week, and actually, you know when it's skirmishing in the Napoleonic period, when it's not reinforced, the main battle is not committed by sending in brigades of line troops.
Nothing's developing, basically, and it's already 2 p.m. So it's the odds of a battle being fought are becoming less and less today, even though it might have looked kind of high earlier on.
French start to slightly curve around and go more west than southwest.
The reason they do this is because Wellington feels kind of instinctively, because everybody's kind of hidden behind ridges at the second, that Marmont is going to try and get around his right flank again. So what he does is he alters the route of the 3rd Division under General Pakenham.
His brother-in-law.
Yeah, and he orders him, he's temporary command of the fighting 3rd Division, because General Picton is ill. He alters their route of march from going towards the town of Arapiles. Basically, he orders them to turn to their right and move.
So they go straight west rather than southwest, and so they actually gather a bit of a distance.
Yeah. Now, apparently, Marmont sees this, and he thinks that means Wellington is going to retreating back to Portugal. He thinks that's his baggage train.
He sees the dust, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
It's kind of haze in the very far distance, which would have been the closest point to Salamanca. So, It's
reasonable, and also reasonable because we have to think, why would he think this about Wellington? Why would he think he's going to retreat? I've not done anything to make him retreat. He thinks this because he thinks, like everybody else thinks still today, that Wellington is a defensive general. He's got it into his head that he can do anything, he can risk anything in front of Wellington, and Wellington will not attack him.
Everyone always mistakes Wellington for being a defensive general. Today, it's an overview because of Waterloo. Wellington can go on the offensive, and he does it really well.
And Marmor's going to find this out in a second.
He's just about to find it. It's pushing towards 3 o'clock in the afternoon, now, and Marmor's day is going to get a hell of a lot worse.
Marmor, therefore, thinking that Wellington is in retreat, he wants to catch him and fight him. And so he sends, first of all, he sends one division, I think it is under General Thomier, passing it behind the Arapiles, behind this ridge of ground, to come around Wellington's right flank to try and push after this apparently retreating column. This is the tempo of what has been happening over the last week. Wellington does something, he tries to get around him, etc., etc. So he's just following basically what he's been doing. And Wellington, who has been watching like a hawk for something to happen, it's late in the day, as you're saying, between 2 and 3 p.m., he sees suddenly troops. I should also say that Marmor then does send another division after Thomier's General Malcoun. And I think it is said that Wellington, well, what we'll say is that's what's happening on the French side. Now, what's happening on the British side? Wellington's army is in a kind of a loose L shape.
Well, it's a reverse L, so down from the north to southwest.
A reverse L.
So they're trying to follow that southwest division, so they've
exactly
formed around the Arapiles.
Yeah. Good one. Reverse L, and Wellington rides is sort of arranging his troops to come and mass around the town of Arapile, and he's been up since dawn. Miguel Alava moans about the fact that you get up at dawn and you get fed cold meat at dinner, and it's awful being on Wellington staff. And
that's actually quite a common complaint with Wellington staff, that unlike many French marshals who ended up bringing like a small entourage and a palace with them, often sometimes with several mistresses at the same time, Wellington has a cook and a valet who acts as a footman as well, has a very small course of staff. They often complain that the food is really bland and really mild, they're eating late in the day, but they do often compliment Wellington that he always stocks a good claret. So a man after my own heart, that he likes. It's about the quality, not the quantity of the wine that he's serving.
And today, he's too busy really to be caring about lunch or anything, or a midday meal.
Stop and have a field table. That's not really his style. So again, the French are known that they're often almost like picnic with a trestle table and some silverware. Wellington's got saddlebags, and inside there he often gets bread, hard cheese, boiled eggs, and cold meat.
Mm-hmm.
And the story goes, now it's a bit disputed.
There are several versions. Yeah,
there are several versions of this, but roughly he's seeing this French extension, and that's causing a split between about the 3 and 4 divisions of the French, and that causes him to see this gap. It's just widening as some are holding up and some are heading off towards the British 3rd Division, which they think are the British baggage, but they're not, there to the rear. And this is the opportune moment that Wellington has been waiting for. In fact, Wellington has been waiting for it for about 3 weeks as they've been marching, and he sees it. And apparently, he's eating this chicken leg, and he says, "That'll do, by damn," and throws his chicken leg over his shoulder in excitement, and he starts issuing orders. He's seen his moment, and he's gonna go do something about it.
Right, and then begins Wellington's wild ride. First of all, he rides to the top of the Lesser Arapile to make sure he's seeing what he thinks he's seeing. It's confirmed. He rides back down the Arapile, shouting apparently to Miguel Alava, "Maman est perdu, mon cher Alava," and then gallops all the way across. It's at least it's well over a mile, all the way over
I've got a scale here, and it looks somewhere between 1.5 miles and 2 miles. Right,
and you get all the way to General Pakenham's 3rd Division, which is over. Where is it? It's just behind a little town.
The Alada.
Aldea Tejada.
Yes.
But but that's where they are. He rides up to them. Apparently, he gets to General de Urban first. He tells General de Urban very precisely, down to what formation he wants him to adopt to move forward.
This is what I love about Wellington. Not only is he an opportunist, he is an attacking officer. We've got it all wrapped up at Salamanca. So I get really excited about Salamanca. But he's a micromanager. Not always necessarily a good thing, but Salamanca just kind of encapsulates all of this in one big thing, like you say. He's not saying, I'm going to send an aide-de-camp to ride across there, and they're going to bring an order and say, Ned, hey, brother-in-law, come on in. We're gonna have a big Barney today. No, none of that. Wellington does it himself. Rides. Apparently, he completely outstrips his aide-de-camps, and he's off. He's going across this plain, hell for leather. And then when he arrives, he doesn't say, Ned, follow me. No, he gives detailed orders.
Yeah.
Detailed orders.
So he goes up to, then he goes up, there's another famous moment, he goes up to General Pakenham, Ned Pakenham as he called it, he says, throw your division into a column and drive those fellows to the devil. And apparently Ned Pakenham goes, I will, my lord, if you'll give me your hand. And they apparently shake hands, and off Pakenham goes.
It's an interesting one for me, because Wellington doesn't get on that well with Kitty, his wife. But he's spending probably more time with his brother-in-law, Ned, than he does really with his wife during this time since their marriage. And they've spent many times together. And I always quite lament Ned Pakenham. There's kind of, spoiler alert, he dies at the Battle of New Orleans, which is a sad ending. But he does really well at Salamanca. And I feel that they've got a good bond of brotherhood in battle, but also legal brotherhood as well.
It is. But Wellington's wild ride has not ended yet, because he's just reached the end of his line. And now he rides back along his line. I do believe he is now sending aide-de-camps out as well, to make sure that proper orders are being sent out everywhere.
With him, caught breath, and he's going, now I've got letters for you.
Most people are saying they were given verbal orders by Wellington himself. And so he rides back along the line. He rides back from the 3rd Division. He rides back to the 5th Division. He rides back. And what's great about the Battle of Salamanca from a strategic, tactical point of view is the way it happens. Is that the British attack develops in the tempo that the orders are delivered during this ride.
Yes.
So Pakenham goes first because Wellington reaches him.
He's got a long distance to cover the 3rd. They've got to come swinging down from Wellington's right, the French left, down the main river. They've got to come swinging in, but they come in quickly.
It's now about 4 p.m. according to most of the accounts. And so what happens is a series of hammer blows lands against the now overextended French left flank as Wellington's divisions go forward in echelon, as they say, one after the other as they get their orders. Pakenham's division.
They come in, supported by light cavalry, apparently scatter Thomière's opening flank like sheep, is the quote. They really scatter them quickly.
Yeah, and they roll him back. There is a bit of resistance. They do manage to put up a fight, but they do push him back, and he's rolling him back. Next in line, in this disorganized line is General Macoun's division, and okay, he's got these guys coming, the 3rd Division coming at him from his front, but no, we have the 5th Division under General Leith, and that has been unleashed as well, and that is now bearing down on him. But also bearing down on him, alongside General Leith, is General Le Marchand's heavy cavalry brigade.
So he's got the 3rd Dragoons, 4th Dragoons, and 5th Dragoon Guards with him.
Yeah, and the French feel. Well, actually, what's interesting as well, I haven't actually been able to look into this very much, but there's a bit of a spat between Stapleton Cotton and General Le Marchand just as before they go off.
And the other cavalry commander, yes.
Yes, he's Supreme Allied Cavalry Commander. And apparently, one officer said that there probably would have been a duel or something between the two of them if what happens next had not happened. The French, going back to the French feel that the British heavy cavalry are going to reach them first, and they form a squares. Then they get hit by General Leith's infantry, and they have to redeploy in line And that's when the dragoons hit them.
Perfect timing. A bit like Waterloo, when they just get hit at the opportune moment.
It is often cited as the greatest example of British cavalry work in a general action. They rout General Mackoune's division between him and Leith, and they go straight through. They go straight through them. The carnage is appalling.
Well, they go through the front line fighting them. They go through the next line deploying them, and only actually get stopped at the third line, who've had the time being basically slowed down by the front two lines being slaughtered. And so they're able to form either proper squares or rally squares to actually hold them off. And there's then a bit more confusion as the British cavalry go round the squares and into the woods behind. It's at this point that General Le Marchand, commander of the British cavalry, is killed in the woods. And there leads to then a lot more confusion between the cavalry, purely because General Le Marchand is a man of many talents. But actually what I know him for is he reformed the cavalry when it was at its weakest, when it had disorganized series of procurement and drill. And one of the things he brought in, apart from the famous six cuts, is he does bring in both the heavy and the light cavalry swords. I just thought I want to show my example of areas where he's got a strengthening ridge in sides, tangs, a nice grip. And it was the standardization of having a sword such as this, because before this it was left down to individual regimental colonels to provide their own regiments, and they were given a price, and they could choose to expend more and get a good quality sword, or spend less and pocket the difference. They often chose the latter. They were known that British swords would often snap, and the British cavalrymen, they said, would sometimes chop off their own horses' ears. It looked like they were chopping wood. Armstrong changed that with the drill manual, the famous 6 cuts, and introduced light cavalry and sabre and the heavy cavalry sword, both 1796 pattern.
Indeed. And the elements that you talked about with the light cavalry sword are visible in the heavy cavalry sword with reinforced blade and good guard. People say it's a lesser beast than the light cavalry one. People said it was quite clumsy. It has a bad rep. But here, it did untold carnage to this division of French infantry, to the extent that the French were actually running for safety to the British infantry, covered in sword cuts. The British infantry were actually very sorry for these poor creatures that came desperately running up to them and just collapsing on the ground in front of them. This is the state of the confusion. You now have 2 divisions, that's thousands of men, utterly broken, running into woods, being chased by cavalry.
Running towards, it's like a surrender en masse.
Exactly.
Rather than being cut down and slaughtered.
So that's 45 minutes, as Wellington said, for the actual fighting to take place. He said it might be an exaggeration. I don't know. So it could be accurate. And that is about
half the French force. The whole left wing is in absolute dire straits.
Yeah, indeed. Now, what we need to now say is that the French command structure has taken a bit of a beating itself. British artillery, from the British artillery, British howitzers on the Arapile Chico, Wellington's Arapile, have been opening fire on the French position. And ironically, Marmont, apparently, according to one of his escort officers, was actually having a table set out for his lunch. And he was actually leaving the Arapile Grande to go and sort out matters on the left, when suddenly shells fired from, I believe it's E Troop Royal Horse Artillery, land amongst the staff, and they take him out. He's really badly wounded. In quick succession.
2 or 3 shrapnel or case wounds down his side. He's knocked off his horse and his arm shattered.
Yeah.
Just goes to show that the French style of having a picnic with your table set up is just not always the best tactical decision.
Not always. Not in the face of howitzers, no. And but worse, in quick succession, his successor, General Bonnet, is hit as well, and he is evacuated, leaving it down to, that's 2 changes of command in probably an hour or 2, leaving it down to General Clausel.
I think Bonnet's only got several minutes when he was in command.
Something like that. He has
and
no
so
effect on the battle.
With Clausel's there as like a third in command, so it really has like gone down very rapidly, and that's going to add to any sort of confusion from their regimental headquarters going all the way up to division and corps level.
Really?
It's going to add to a huge level of confusion.
Now, it helps that General Clausel is actually a very capable man. So he throws a division across the plain towards the town of Arapile, and it does cause a bit of consternation. We also need to say that Clausel makes this determination because the 4th Division and I believe it's Pax Brigade, Portuguese Brigade, have been repelled from an attack on the Arapile Grande, and he feels this is an opportunity to at least grab a draw out of this disaster. And he's following up the 4th Division withdrawing, and he does this very fast. Wellington has to shift reserves forward, but Beresford is on the spot, I believe, and he brings in a Portuguese.
Beresford, he's the Field Marshal of the Portuguese Army,
and he checks the attack with his Portuguese infantry, and he gets wounded doing so. And and the attack basically is halted. I think it is by
they are pushed off the Greater Arapile, as you say, and the kind of between the Portuguese and the 4th, they're able to hold in. Around this kind of time that the 1st Division and the Light Division start to be brought back down, the Light Division a bit later, and so then there's a concentration just north, just off the Greater Arapiles, where the majority of the rest of the armies, basically, of who's left, is kind of suckered into the centre point of the battlefield.
Absolutely, but that is essentially in a nutshell the grand scheme of the battle. That is the grand narrative of the battle. That is where it ends when the French are repelled from the centre, and the British have to kind of halt because night is now drawing. It's about 8 p.m. by the time the battle begins to cease. Wellington takes what cavalry he can get together and the Light Division, I believe, and he pursues the French until dark. Embarrassingly, Sir Stapleton Cotton is shot by a Portuguese sentry and wounded. Officer casualties are quite high at the Battle of Salamanca, actually. So there's a lot of senior officers get wounded. Sides. Yeah. But the casualties for the French are enormous.
They're huge. I mean, only about 1 division's left in good order, which is General Foy's division, and they form a rear guard and fighting retreat down the road. Huge amount of French prisoners are taken. If it wasn't for General Foy's division actually almost being out of the action, their closest point to the Light Division, who don't have as much engagement early on. So if those had been engaged quickly, and General Foy was not in good order, most of the French army could have actually been rolled up. It's a shame.
Indeed. They lost about 12,000 men dead and wounded, lost between 11 and 20 guns, 7,000 at least 7,000 prisoners, and 2 eagles. Interestingly, both were captured by the infantry, not by the cavalry. But
they were, which is unusual when you think of the cavalry riding through entire divisions and didn't actually manage to get their hands on any eagles. It almost gives you a scale of this kind of the wild kind of charge of the cavalry, and B, the fact that you sometimes feel that once they've hit a target, British cavalry is not always in control. They're riding on into those woods.
Exactly. Ideally, as soon as they hit one target, they should ideally have been stopped and brought back, and another, and then a reserve thrown forwards. But that's
rode on and on and on.
We need to have a video about cavalry tactics to talk about that in any detail. So that, ladies and gentlemen, opens the road to Madrid. Behind Marmor's shattered army, which is now limping away into the night, which they do manage to break off contact, although they are hammered again at Garcia Hernandez by the King's German Legion heavy dragoons. More men are captured, and squares are broken by the heavy Germans, as they were called. Behind Marmor's retreating army is Marshal Jourdan and Joseph Bonaparte with about, I want to say, 14,000 reinforcements. But the road, they can't hold Madrid. They have no stomach to hold Madrid. And on the 12th of August, Wellington captures Madrid. And Napoleon made his own bed for the mess that Spain got in 1812, because he gave some very imbecilic orders about how the French generals were supposed to defend Spain from Wellington. And part of the reason Marmont got into the mess he got into was because Napoleon, I believe, demanded offensive measures, but Marmont did not have the means actually to bring them through. In a way, Napoleon is as much to blame for Salamanca as Marmont's misstep by extending his left.
Marmont's army would have been much bigger if they had had a different tactic towards Spanish people. But they didn't. Not very long afterwards, these two eagles, which were captured by the 30th, I think that's the Cambridgeshire Regiment, and the 44th East Essex Regiment, their eagles are back in London. And then there's over 6,000 to 7,000 French prisoners, 11 cannon, and a retreating army, whereas the Allies take about just over 5,000 casualties. Most of those British, about 2,000 Portuguese, and I was reading earlier, six full stop, Spanish.
There's only one division of Spaniards under Don Carlos de España, and they are in the kind of reserve position around Arapiles, and they just don't get into the fighting at all at Salamanca.
And it's a battle that's still celebrated today. It's still the battle honour of the Rifles, who are the descendants of the 95th and the 60th, and a couple of the light infantry. Actually, the light infantry later have become the Rifles as they are today. It's still celebrated by a few of those regiments and some late times cavalry, and well known in Spain, far better celebrated than we celebrate in Britain, unfortunately.
Yes, indeed. Well, they call it, I believe, the Batalla de los Arapiles. And
it is the Batalla de Arapiles, as they're fighting over the Arapiles, as outside of Salamanca. But it's one that should be in the front of people's minds. If you want to find a good Battle of Wellington, a good offensive, look no further than Salamanca.
It's a fascinating battle from a strategic and tactical point of view. As always, we must remember that in the blazing heat of the Spanish summer, when it comes down to it, there's very little glory in an infantry soldier getting horrendously wounded and dying in a dusty field somewhere. And that is the reality of these great maneuvers and these great strategies, that on the ground, a cavalryman will come up to a French soldier who'd never heard of the Duke of Wellington before and basically cuts his head off. Or a poor chap from Cambridgeshire gets unlucky enough to get a bullet through the head, or worse, through the stomach, as he's mounting the French ridge. Or a shell explodes over a Spanish division and kills 6 guys who didn't get into action. Keep that in mind as well.
This is horrible truth of the Napoleonic era war. The wounds were quite lingering, medicine's terrible, and the chance of saviour after that is low.
It is now up to the surgeons. It is now, as one soldier said, up to God and the surgeons. And that is Wellington's victory at Salamanca, which will soon be broadcast as far as Borodino, as far as Moscow in Russia. The eve of Borodino, Napoleon and the Russians learn that the Lord Wellington has crushed the French in Spain. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching.
That was Salamanca.
Yes, that was Salamanca. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like and leave a comment if you have a thought about anything. And we will see you for the next All Things Wellington very soon.